I have had the misfortune of coming across a few scary guys in my life. My friends will say I'm a weirdo magnet, so I'm pretty wary and clued up now that I'm a bit older. But when I was a teenager, I suppose you could say I was very naive. Back when I was 20, I and my family, my mum and little sister, had moved from a small rural village in the Shires to a town down south. It was a huge change, and as I had been having a difficult time, I welcomed the change of scenery. It was a beautiful town in an affluent part of the country, but I struggled to find a job and became very frustrated as my mom needed a bit of help with money. Over the course of about 3 months, we became fairly friendly with a middle-aged guy who owned a takeaway shop in town. I will call him Phil. If he saw us doing some shopping, he would come and chat and ask how the family was, and he genuinely seemed like a decent, caring bloke. So when he said he might have a job for me, in his shop with a small flat upstairs I could rent for next to nothing, I thought, okay, great. Maybe things are looking up. Phil got our address and told me and Mum he would pop by early evening when he had finished and take me in the car to go and see the flat. I get myself looking fairly casual but presentable, and I'm feeling excited and confident thinking, wow, a job in a flat. I've killed 2 birds with 1 stone here. I just need to show him I'm sophisticated and would make a great employee. Around 8 p.m., he knocks on the front door and Mom answers. He tells her we will probably only be about half an hour and he will have me back safe and sound in no time. Now, I didn't take my phone with me as I had no credit to call out and didn't think I would be needing it for a quick trip up the road and back. In hindsight, a pretty stupid thing to do. Maybe if I had my phone on me, it would have deterred him from what he was about to do. It's already dark out as it's March. I get into his car and we start driving and he is chatting away, asking how I am and telling me what the flat is like. When within a matter of a few minutes, I've noticed that we are not taking the conventional route that takes us directly into town. At first, I think he is taking me down some sort of shortcut round the town to get to it and just reason with myself that he knows the area well and I don't. 30 seconds after, I realize he is taking me in the completely opposite direction, and I can tell that we are driving away from the populated town and into an area where trees swamp both sides of the road. My brain is now working overtime thinking, where the fuck is this guy taking me? And I just about manage to keep my composure, and I ask him outright, where are we going? Town's back the other way. I just thought I would take you on a little tour. It's beautiful here, with many forests and peaceful places I would love to show you. He tells me in his normal cheery tone. I wasn't capable of saying anything at that moment because the logical and the reasoning sides of my brain were in a full-blown war. I'm trying to keep calm, thinking, okay, he seems fairly normal. Why wouldn't he want to show me around? It is a stunning area full of natural beauty. He is probably proud to show me where he lives. The logical side, however, disagreed, and a wave of panic comes over me, and a little voice enters my head and shouts, "Shit, no, are you stupid?" So I just sit there in silence, taking in the scenery, which is becoming more sinister by the second because at that moment in time, I didn't know what to think. All I know is every cell in my body is screaming at me to find a way out of this situation. I started looking for signposts, houses, any distinctive landmarks, ditches, huge trees, or anything that would be able to use to recognize my way back if I had to bolt from his car. Phil can obviously sense I'm nervous, so he is just talking away at me about what the job is like and how his staff are friendly, and before I know it, he has slowed down to a crawl, and he has turned down a little mud rut road with a dense tree line on one side and pitch black open fields on the other. My stomach literally drops, and my body contemplates power vomiting all over his car because the reality of what is about to potentially happen hits me like a freight train. I'm thinking to myself, if I jump out here, I have to be able to run over muddy fields into literally nowhere, but my imagination starts rather helpfully flashing by images of him grabbing me before I get a chance to get out the door. So I just sit there buckled in the passenger seat, not saying a word. I'm just thinking to myself, if he attacks me, don't make a sound. Don't give him the satisfaction of showing him I'm scared. My brain was about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and I was starting to get angry with myself for not doing something, but I was terrified. We come out at the top of this little dirt road, and there is a tiny little car park surrounded by woodland with one car parked in it. It was clear there were people in there having sex, and as he pulls near the car, I realize he has brought me to a local dogging spot. He turns to me and puts his hand on my knee. We should do what they are doing, with a deadly serious expression on his face. I make this bizarre half-nervous laugh, half-garbled high-pitched whine, and I try to laugh off the suggestion to show I'm not into it, and I'm super uncomfortable right now. The alarmed expression on his face at my gurgled cackle which sounds like I've swallowed a potato whole, clearly freaks him out, and I'm mentally congratulating myself for my socially awkward and grossly unsexy reaction. It will be fun. No one will see us. He persists. No, I don't want to. Plus, I'm kind of seeing someone right now. I lie, but he sits there just smiling at me like a Cheshire cat, like I'm going to miraculously change my mind at the sight of his weird face. Mom will be expecting me home now. I tell him after an insanely uncomfortable 30 seconds more of this as I try my damn hardest not to make eye contact. I'm sure she won't mind you being out a bit longer with me. You can trust me, you know. He tells me with a straight face as we sit next to the sex wagon parked next to us. I sharply pull my leg away from his grip and I tell him again. Mom is waiting for me. She will start panicking if I'm not home in the next few minutes. Take me home. I look him straight in the face and he knows that I'm not messing around. Okay, that's fine. I'll take you back now. Without another word, he drives me out of that creepy, seedy place and back home. My finger is hovering over the seatbelt button, ready to jump out. As we pull up outside our home, I breathe a sigh of relief as I can see my safety literally a few feet away, and before he can stop me, I'm out and slam the door behind me. As I'm stepping over a tiny little rope fence around our garden, he gets out of his car and my heart sinks. I think I'll pop in and see your mom quickly, he tells me, and I swear I can see a smirk on his face, but I know he is only doing this because he is freaking out knowing damn well I'm going to tell her. He was trying to delay the inevitable or scare me into keeping my mouth shut. Before I can try and talk him out of it, Mom has heard us pull up and open the front door. I barge past her with one thought on my mind. I head straight into the kitchen, grab a small knife out of the drawer, and fly into my little sister's room like a mad woman. Don't you dare fucking leave this room no matter what you hear, I whisper to her. Seeing the knife I am stuffing up my sleeve, she just looks at me with panic in her eyes and whispers back, okay. I walk back into the living room and the cheeky twat is sitting on one sofa, sprawled out, comfortable as fuck like he is at home. I see red. I swear to God I felt like the Hulk. I'm ready for the bastard. I awkwardly perch myself on the arm of the sofa Mum is sitting on, the absolute furthest away from him I can manage, as he just sits there making small talk with Mum about how she is finding the area and if the neighbors are friendly, all the while keeping his beady little weasel eyes on my every move. Why don't you come and sit over here next to me? He pats the sofa cushion next to him. No, I'm all right here, thanks. I tell him as I'm fidgeting with my sleeve, trying to stop the little knife from falling out in front of him. Why are you sitting over there? Come here. Honestly, I won't bite. He laughs and pats the seat next to him again. No, I am quite comfortable here. Thank you very much. This time through gritted teeth. My mom, bless her, is looking at each of us during this back and forth like a tennis match, and I can see something is registering in her eyes. She can see my behavior is all off. I've got one bum cheek weirdly perched on the sofa arm, so I'm half stood up, half sat down, and I'm fiddling about with my sleeve. I'm twitchy as hell and staring my mom in the face intensely, mentally trying to speak to her through the power of telepathy alone. I must have looked like a nutter. It's getting late now, so I think you should go. She finally speaks. Mom is starting to look anxious now as she has finally twigged that something has happened. Phil gets up, agrees, and mumbles something about having to check something at his shop when he walks by me and is nearly out of the room when he pauses and turns to me and puts out his hand to shake mine. I'm thinking to myself what a fucking weird thing to do. I take the opportunity to kindly offer him my hand that had the knife. Taking it with a bit more force than is polite, he soon yanked his grubby mitt out of mine. When the tip of the blade had jabbed him, he looked down and saw the blade. Then he looked at me. I looked at him with such disgust. Bill hightailed it out of our home so fast without another word. A prick for a prick. I told Mom everything. She was fuming. We did discuss going to the police, but there wasn't really a crime committed on his part aside from being a major creep. Sadly, when I mentioned to a couple of girls my age who lived down our street, they clammed up and shot each other a strange look. I guessed he had probably done this type of thing before. We moved away from the area after that, so I'm glad to report I never have to see his smug face ever again. I deliver pizza, and I'd been having a really busy night. Non-stop back and forth, without any time to even pause and take a leak. I'd been so busy that I wasn't really thinking about bathroom breaks. But we're also going through a bit of a heat wave in our area, so I've been drinking copious amounts of water. All of a sudden, as I was driving to this particular delivery, the urge to go hit me. Like things went from 0 to 60 in an instant. Thankfully, I was close to the customer, so I could get this one over with quickly. Or so I thought. I pulled up to the house, and it was an area I'd delivered in before, so I could immediately see that something wasn't right. All the lights were off in the house, not even the glow of a television or anything. It was extra apparent because the streetlight closest to the door happened to be out of order, and on top of it all, the block was dead quiet. This is a big university area, and obviously there aren't many student renters in July, but there had to be at least one person because someone ordered this pizza. Maybe they just liked sitting in the dark, or they were out back in the yard. Whatever. I just didn't want to get out of my car and knock on a quiet house in the middle of the night, around 9:30 p.m., without first checking that I had the correct address and the customer was inside. It was scorching that night, even after sundown. My car's AC is a joke, and the piping hot pizzas don't help things much, so I have to try and open the car door as infrequently as possible to keep any cool air in. I called the number the customer provided, and the voice on the other end said, kind of brusquely and out of breath, "Yeah?" I just tried to keep it clear and concise. "Hey, it's your pizza out front, but there doesn't appear to be anybody home." And the customer replied, still gasping for air, "Yeah, I'm not home." I had to pee so badly by that point that I was much less patient than I'd otherwise be with a customer right out of the gate. "Well, then we're going to have to terminate the order because I've arrived in the stated delivery window and you were supposed to pay in cash, so I don't know what to tell you. Plan ahead next time." I instantly regretted letting my bladder do the talking for me, as the voice on the other end came through more clearly as a young, bubbly, and very distraught girl who couldn't have been older than 20 or 25. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I was running down the street so I could barely hear you," she cried. "I just switched you out of my AirPods. Is that better? Sorry, I completely lost track of time at work, but I knew you were coming. That's why I'm literally running home right now. Please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Seriously, please don't leave. 5 minutes tops, okay? I know what it's like to be hungry and running late and have no car but not live near any restaurants." Plus, when I heard her voice, I began to remember more specifically having delivered to this place a couple of times before, and she'd always been perfectly nice. Now I felt bad for snapping at her. I tried to walk it back, while simultaneously looking out my window for potential spots to pee. No, my bad. I'm letting the heat get to me, and it's not your fault. No need to rush. See you when you get here." I hung up, and while surveilling the street, was starting to think I was really out of luck. All the other houses had people in them and were close together, so there were no clumps of trees or out-of-the-way patches of land or anything. Of course, I had just tossed my empty water bottle at the last delivery because I'm an idiot. Finally, I decided it was escalating to the point of an emergency, and the safest bet was to use a bush in front of the woman's house. She wasn't home. The street light was out, so no one would see me. The people who were home were inside. My car was parked across the street, and we're a small shop that doesn't wear uniforms, so if someone did spot me, they'd have no way to connect me to my employer. Animals pee outside all the time. Humans are animals. This is fine. I scurried over to the tallest bush in her front yard. She didn't really have much of a yard, more just a walkway lined with bushes and flowers that ran adjacent to her front door. The biggest cluster of bushes, the only one where I could be sure there would be no visible splatter on the side of the house, was about 4 feet from her door. I looked both ways, unzipped, and let fly. After the initial millisecond of relief, I noticed the sound was way off, more like pissing on something solid than something leafy. I started panicking, thinking I'd aimed wrong. But once I start, I can't stop midstream, so I keep squinting into the darkness to see if maybe I am hitting a key rock or something and could just move a few inches over. Instead, all of a sudden, I heard a way more concerning noise. A deep voice exclaiming, "What the fuck?" And before I could turn around, assuming I'd been caught by a neighbor, a man came leaping out of the bushes. He blew by me, brushing my golden shower off him as he did. He spit pretty emphatically on the ground, so I think I might have beamed him right in the face. I didn't see where he went after a few paces, but though this next part is kind of a blur, I do think I remember hearing a car screech out from a bit further away after a minute. I'd gotten some night vision by that point, so I was able to make out his height, build, and outfit, but only the most general details of each. I was in such shock that I didn't even put my dick away. I just stood there trying to figure out what had happened. The reality was so terrifying that my mind refused to accept it and impulsively searched for a reasonable explanation that could make everything okay. I thought, could these bushes lead to some backyard area and just look like they were against the house? Could they have been obscuring an open window? My inner voice was desperately screaming, bruh, that man was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree weather. That was a bad man. You're in a bad situation. But the very idea that I was within inches of a guy who would be hiding in bushes at all, let alone in front of a young woman's house at night, just wasn't something I was ready to grapple with yet. I was coping by not coping. My fight or flight response totally failed me at that point, because my dumbass did the absolute last thing I should have done, and approached the bushes to try and validate this. There must have been a good reason for a man in a hoodie to be behind these bushes in the middle of the night. Theory. So I walked over to the side, turned on my phone flashlight, and tried to peer around the line of shrubbery. Pro tip. As scary as things may look in the dark, seeing them with a single beam of your flashlight can sometimes make it even worse. That's when I saw the bag. There was a tattered drawstring bag sitting behind the bushes, slightly splashed with pee. But I was in such a moronic daze from shock that I groped around for it thinking, see, this is it. This will explain why he was back here. It explained it. Once I maneuvered it over and pulled it open, I saw a sharp knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. The delusions officially broke at that point, and all the adrenaline, endorphins, and self-preservation instincts that had been suppressed kicked in 10 times over. I became whatever the opposite of dazed is, more laser-focused than I have ever been in my life, with one singular goal: get back to my car. I dropped the bag, booked it across the street, got in my car and slammed the pedal to the floor before the door was even all the way closed. I went as far as I could as fast as I could until I hit a red signal. Then I pulled off to the side and realized I shouldn't be driving any more than necessary in the condition I was in. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour drugstore and took a breath. I was finally calm and coherent enough to zip up and formulate a plan of action. My first lucid thought was, who do I call first, the police or the girl whose house that was? I thought about it for what couldn't have really been more than 10 seconds, but it felt like an hour, and I decided, okay, I'm in my locked car with the engine running. If trouble starts, I can drive away. I know something's up. She might not. She needs to know not to keep walking in that direction. But as I was dialing her number, it occurred to me, what if there was no girl? I thought I remembered delivering to that house before, but what if I was wrong? What if the girl on the phone was just a decoy to get me there to rob me? Or worse. Every pizza guy on the planet has seen the Evil Genius documentary by now, so I thought. She called me all out of breath. She wasn't home. The whole thing was off. I can't risk it. I'll start with the cops. I called 911. The operator was very helpful in keeping me calm because I was a complete wreck by this point. He kept assuring me that someone would be there soon. I kept telling them they had to get there before the girl did. But I was trying to express 3 thoughts at once, and I was really damaging my own credibility. It came out more as, you've got to save this girl because he wasn't after me. I was just delivering a pizza. Unless they were after me, in which case there might not be a girl. But I talked to one on the phone, so then you should find that girl because they used her to lure me there. But if she's real, she doesn't know about the guy, who was also real, and there could be more guys if there's actually a girl. And you know what? Even if there isn't a girl, there might actually be more guys. I only checked one part of the bushes, so I don't actually know. But we'll know which guy is the one I saw because I pissed all over him, you know. I didn't mean to. This was back when I thought the girl was real, but not home. But she might be real, so you really need to find her if she is. Because the guy was real. Finally, they basically just asked me to stop talking and stay on the line. But that was when I saw an incoming call from the customer. I couldn't answer it without disrupting my 911 call, so I just ignored it. But then she sent me this text like, hey, I'm here, don't see you. I told 911 she was there, and they said officers were only minutes away. But who knows how long that meant, especially after I'd given such a scattered account of the events in my panic. I just felt overwhelmed with guilt, because my rational mind said the odds of her being a decoy girl for some large scam targeting pizza guys were low, and the odds of her being the intended victim of a predator were high. So I put my 911 call on mute, where I can hear them but they can't hear me, and turned back, my heart absolutely pounding out of my chest, compulsively muttering, fuck, the entire way. Then I took 911 off mute and told them I had returned to look for the girl. They weren't happy about that, but I saw her meandering past the parked cars in the street, looking to see if one was mine, and I waved her down, flashing my brights. She bounced on over to the window of my car, happy-go-lucky. I figured that was a good sign that she wasn't in on whatever this was. But I was just so scared to be back in the general area and to not know what had just happened or what was going to happen. I kept whispering, "Get in, get in." And she was like, "Get it, huh? Oh, you want me to get the pizza from the back?" I didn't want to make the same mistake with her that I had made with 911, so instead of trying to tell the whole story, I stuck to the bare basic facts. There was a man in your bushes. I'm on the phone with the police. I don't know where he is right now. Please get in the car so we can lock the doors. I was barely able to get even those sentences out, and I was shaking like I'd had 10 cups of black coffee. I held up my phone with 911 on the call screen to verify it for her. I thought that was why she got in the car with no further explanation, but it turns out that wasn't entirely it. "You still there? Is she with you? Are you safe? Is anyone else there?" The dispatcher kept checking in, not knowing who the third party I was talking to was. I reassured them, and we drove, more cautiously this time, to a location 911 instructed us to wait at to speak with police after they cleared the area. I didn't actually have to do much after that. The police came pretty soon after. A police car met us. I gave a statement telling them everything I observed, and she went to go speak to more officers in more detail than they needed me for. It turns out, the reason she got right into a strange pizza guy's car, without probing any deeper into my story, is because she knew who the man was right away from my description. She had an abusive ex-boyfriend who was apparently psychotic enough that he immediately came to mind from hearing, "There's a guy in your bushes." She later called us to thank me and insist on leaving a huge tip. I wasn't there when the call came in, so the kid who answered didn't know to refuse to accept the money. But the manager already promised the next time we see her we can load her up with enough one free pie cards to last a lifetime. Easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, on the job or off. I don't get the chance to tell the story much because I try to avoid sharing it with anyone who could possibly know the girl, or know of the event. But I'm still not the same since. Even though I know he didn't even have anything to do with me directly, this truly shook me to my core. This may be a ramble of thoughts, but after recently stumbling on this sub, I finally felt a place I could offer something that my family and I experienced a few years ago that to this day gives me a shiver. I have been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon and felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. A few years ago, my wife, daughter, and 2 German shepherds went camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I have included the coordinates of our campsite, which we found to be the perfect setup for us and our 2 dogs, who need the privacy since they are intimidating to other dog owners and can be loud when spooked. It was not an established campsite, just a nice horseshoe, off a USFS road that had flat ground, full trees, and a fire pit. The first night my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a 2-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away from me and my wife's tent. We made the male German shepherd sleep, Guts is his name, with her in the tent. That whole first night, neither my wife nor I could sleep. We both heard footsteps, and they were heavy, not like typical forest critters scampering around the night. I was well armed because I was paranoid from reading recently, before departing, about a dad in California who was shot and killed in a tent next to his 2 infant daughters. Needless to say, both my wife and I had 2 pistols and my rifle with me. The dogs are great at detection, and that is why I felt my daughter could sleep alone, because Guts is completely fearless, and nothing would lay a hand on her without a battle to the death. All in all, nothing but bad vibes and loud footsteps occurred that night, which I ultimately decided was deer or maybe some elk. Day 2. Morning. We go for a walk down the road, and maybe 300 feet away, I see the circular area in the photo. I see an abandoned road where a rusted gate post. The gate was missing, was covered in vegetation. Something of blue color caught my eye, and Guts immediately took off running down this abandoned road. My heart began to race because I thought it was another family camping like us, and he was going to get himself shot or scare some innocent people to death. So I chased after him as fast as I could, and the rest followed. He stops after 20 feet into the road and me yelling his name, but I have covered just enough distance to see that there's nobody there and something is off about the site. I yell, "Hello, is anyone there? Sorry about the dog." I got no response. My curiosity gets the best of me, and I have to see what the site conditions were. As I get closer, I know something is wrong. It had all the necessities for a campsite, including a cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, and folding table. But every single item had been completely destroyed, smashed and torn from what appeared to be claw marks. We all walked around in circles, puzzled why anyone would leave all their camping gear behind, including an expensive REI tent. I figured, well, someone left in a hurry and animals got to the rest as the only logical explanation. Still, a propane tank and cooler were flattened by something, and it certainly wasn't snowpack with tree coverage in that spot. As the afternoon rolls in, my daughter and I are playing bocce ball at the campsite, and my wife goes walking maybe 70 feet north to do her business. I do not have a direct line of sight on her, but all of a sudden I see Guts make a mad dash straight towards her. Normally he would always be with me unless he was called over, and she didn't call for him. His speed and focus caught my attention, and I knew something weird was happening, so I ran over there, and my wife starts jogging at me, and I immediately draw my pistol. Guts has completely continued running into the forest another 100 feet before I call him, and he stopped. My other dog, Leia, who never misses the opportunity to be the pack leader, is not taking point. I have had her for now 7 years, and this was the first time in her life she refused to leave my daughter's side. She was full of hair raised and attached to us at the hip. Again, anytime we hike or play, Leah is up front, bossing everything in her path, and pauses to look to see where we are and continues. I asked my wife what happened, and she said, "I was trying to pee, and all of a sudden I felt all my hairs raise. I knew someone was watching me, and then I saw Guts running towards me, and I just got up to move towards you." We spent 10 minutes looking for signs of anything, and saw no trails, broken branches, or anything to point to what and where something went. We decide we are spending one more night, since it's too late to pack up and drive, but we will all be in the big tent together. Before we go to bed, I put a rope with a makeshift coin alarm around the perimeter of our campsite. I used a mint can and some coins and keys from our truck, and zip-tied it so anything hitting the rope gave a little jingle. Very unsophisticated, but it put my wife at ease. As I go to tie my last corner off at a tree near our tent, our third mystery item unveils itself. It looks like someone has done the same exact thing I have done with a rope that was so old and brown I didn't see it at first. It was broken, and only a few pieces remained, but sure enough, it was tied at roughly the same height, approximately 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and even had a few rusted washers on it. I immediately felt someone had stayed here before and put the same makeshift warning system on the same tree. Maybe 10 to 15 years ago, based on the condition of the rope. Perhaps my paranoia has now reached a new height, but I had to make sure the girls felt we were safe, and at the time the only thing I could think of was when the evening came around, I made them sit in the truck, and I fired a clip of my .45 into the dirt as a signal to whatever was out there that we were armed. I reassured the girls that anybody listening to that now knows we have 2 wolves and are armed, and we are too risky of a target, so we can sleep safely. That night we heard no footsteps, and the dogs never perked up and barked. We left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, and I watched the Amazon Missing 411 Hunted documentary, and I noticed the cluster smack dab close to where we camped that weekend, and a flood of dread rushes over me as I think of that mysterious abandoned campsite with the ripped tent and smashed cooler and cooktop. We have been camping since, and have enjoyed the beauty of the NW, but there was something there at that place that possibly took or harmed someone else less than 300 feet away from where we camped, and we all thank our lucky stars. Guts was doing his thing so well that afternoon. I live in Finland in a fairly small city. This happened to me a year ago when I was 14. So it was Friday evening, and on every Friday, our mom let us go to the store and buy candy. So my 12-year-old sister and I left our house to go to the store, and it was already dark outside. We made our way to the closest store, which was over a mile away. While walking at some point, there's a man behind us walking the same way, but I didn't think much about it at the time. He could be just going to the same store. So I continue chatting with my sister while the man is behind us, following at a safe distance. We got to the store with no complications, and the man followed us into the store. We take our time selecting our candy and get to the register to pay. While I was packing the candy to my backpack, I saw this man buying only a chocolate bar. Pretty far way to go for a chocolate bar, I thought, and at this point my suspicions start to rise for this guy. I get out of the store with my sister and we start making our way back. We walked for a while and I quickly glanced back and the man was still there following us. I took a look at my sister, who seemed totally unaware of the man's presence. We continued our walk, and up ahead of us was an unlit dirt road that continued for a good part of the trip. So I looked back again, and there the man still was, about 60 feet away. At this point, I was almost certain that he was following us because on our way to the store, he did not walk this part of the way behind us. The dirt road goes through a forest, and it had a curve at the start of it. Once we get to the curve, I look back and notice that the man can't see us. So I pull my sister to the woods, and we duck down in the woods. My sister is saying something, and I just whisper, "Stay quiet," to her as I wait for the man to come. I could see the man's shadow coming down the road, and he started looking for us from the road. He walked back and forth on the road. Now I was certain he was following us all that time. My heart was racing, and I tried to be as quiet as possible. The man didn't find us, but continued running forwards. We stayed in the forest for a while before getting the courage to come out. We walk the rest of the way home with no problems and get to our house. We eat our candy and have a good evening, but that really did bother me for a while, and especially my sister. Thinking about this still gives me the chills, and the thought of getting caught in that situation creeps me out, and I try not to think about it. I wouldn't want to meet this guy again. It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he'd left them at my apartment. One night I was bored and decided to go try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area preserved nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself, and female. But I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I had hiked there at night before, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign "Park closes at 10", and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I'd found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini mag light on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity, hopefully the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near pitch darkness into bright as day. Everything appears in shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer though, and I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. A man, dressed head to toe in dark-colored clothing, making his way stealthily through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited, and at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter. There were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I was suddenly horribly aware of my situation. A young woman alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 90s, so no cell phones, and even if I'd had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess his eyes had just adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car, if he'd circled back and seen my parked car, alone in the lot, if he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever, but was probably another half hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say, "Fuck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet with sweat and crying, until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all down the sides of the car with something sharp. Presumably, a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me, and thank God for big trees with sturdy branches. This is the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and what makes it worse is that had things gone down differently, I might not have been here to tell the story. Okay, first things first. I am a girl about 5 feet 7 inches and around 130 pounds. This happened to me about 3 years ago when I was in my early 20s and still a student, living in a very safe area. Growing up, I had loved martial arts, and having grown up in a small rural town, I'd take what I could get. Karate? Fine. Judo? Sure. Kung Fu? Why not? Taekwondo? Sign me up. I loved martial arts, I still do, because they helped me discipline my body and mind and grow my confidence. It had been a few years since I had moved out to my country's capital to study, and I had kind of fallen off the martial arts wagon at that point, with college taking up most of my time. I should also mention that at the time I lived with my younger brother and our cat. We lived on the first floor, the second floor for all my American people, right next to a military camp and a patch of forest that leads to a creek. On our back balcony, there was a circular metal ladder that would lead up to our balcony and the kitchen door, which, of course, we always kept under lock and key. Except for when the cat wanted to go out, when we'd unlock the door, and he would go down the outdoor metal stairs to find his cat friends and play. I commuted to my college every day by walking 30 minutes to a bus stop, then riding the bus for an hour, and then walking another 10 minutes until I made it to campus. And when it was time to go home, I'd have to do the same thing all over again, so, as you can imagine, it was very tiring. I would be out of the house every day from 10 in the morning until almost 10 at night. So when I'd come home, I'd be tired. I don't believe in premonitions much, but I do believe in instinct, and for quite a while I felt like something was up with that patch of forest behind our apartment. I felt watched. Maybe it was the blackness of that patch of forest that made me feel uneasy, because there wasn't a single light there, and the outdoor ladder looked like it descended into an abyss. You could take 3 steps into that patch of forest, and you'd be under a complete cover of darkness. It made me feel weird because even though I couldn't see anything, I knew that something was up. I had no proof, but I knew it. I was in class one Wednesday afternoon with my best friend at the time, and a professor came in to pitch an internship to us. Internships aren't very well known in my country, so professors actually have to argue their case about why, as students, we could benefit from this. My best friend, I'll call her Kay, was very interested, but when the professor listed off the requirements, she realized she couldn't apply as her GPA wasn't high enough. This led to Kay having a crying fit after the class was over, which led to a panic attack, and it got so bad that she called her boyfriend to come pick her up from campus. And since I didn't want to leave her alone, I stayed with her until her boyfriend showed up and got in his car with her. The conversation in the car was basically me and her boyfriend trying to console her and help cheer her up. I asked her if she'd like me to go over to her place so we could all hang out, but she said that she was okay and didn't want to put me through the hassle of commuting home the next day. She lives a full hour away by car, so 2 hours away by public transport. So it was decided that they would drop me off at my house and they'd go to theirs. We get to my house around 7 p.m., a full 3 hours before I normally come home. I hug her, tell her to text me if she needs anything. I thank her boyfriend and get out of the car, glad that I'll be home early for a change. I went in through the main entrance, climbed up the stairs to the first floor, and put my key in the lock. I opened the door and called out my brother's name like I always did and got no response. The house was dark except for one light in the room where the front door opened into, and eerily quiet. But I felt my stomach tie into a knot because even if I couldn't hear anything, I could feel that someone was there. And when my instinct talks, I listen. I turned right into the hallway that leads into our rooms, and I saw my brother's door slam shut hard as soon as I got in the hallway. My brother's room is on the end of the hallway on the left, facing my own room, which is on the right of the hallway. My first thought was that my brother had taken a shower and forgotten to get a towel, so he made a run for it from the bathroom, which is next to my room, in embarrassment. But then I heard muffled whispers coming from his room. It sounded hushed and pressing. I still had no reason to be afraid, but I was on high alert because I thought my brother and his friends were planning on jumping out of his room and scaring me, and I wasn't about to let them get the satisfaction. So I inched down the short hallway, through the darkness, and before I knock on my brother's door, I take a look at my room. It was a fucking mess. My mattress was off my bed. My clothes and my books were all over the floor, and my jewelry box was empty and thrown on my bed. All in all, it looked like a tornado had gone through there. And the hushed whispers in the next room sounded extremely pressing and anxious now that I was close, because though I had tried to tiptoe as silently as possible, my steps had been audible. I realized what was happening, and I went ballistic. At that moment, I fucking lost it. My fight or flight instinct kicked in, and it kicked fight into maximum overdrive. The words danger, thieves, fight hit me like a truck, and I threw my whole weight on my brother's door, busting that door down so furiously, you'd think it owed me money. I saw no one in the room, but it was also a fucking mess, and I knew what I had heard, so I ran to the balcony door. I ripped the curtain out of my way and went through the open balcony door, just in time to catch one of the thieves right after he jumped off the balcony ledge. Looking back on it, he looked like a normal guy. Black hair, normal height, athletic build, big earring on his left ear. But at the time, he looked like a fucking monster to me. A vile, putrid, home-invading, piece of shit thief monster. I started screaming unintelligible things as I saw him stumble around, obviously having hurt his legs, before he got back on his feet and ran away. They were gone. I was safe. But then it hit me. Where the fuck was my laptop? I ran into my room and tore the place apart looking for my laptop. It was gone. I started screaming and crying. The unfairness, audacity, and cowardice hit me like a steel toe to the stomach. I screamed and cried like I was in a Grecian tragedy. I am not rich by any means, and neither is my family. I had an old laptop, which was probably worth pennies secondhand. But I needed that laptop for my schoolwork, and without it, I couldn't finish my semester. Not to mention that I don't have many real-life friends, and the majority of my friends at the time were online. So if I lost that laptop, I lost them too. My laptop was lost, and so was I. I felt violated, dirty, and less than. I was afraid I'd throw up, or pass out, or both. I was taking such rapid and deep panic breaths that my vision began to blur. In the most panicked and grief-stricken state I've ever been in my life, tears streaming down my face, I called my mother to tell her what had happened, and she told me to call the police. It took me almost a full minute on the phone with the operator telling her again and again where I lived, who I was, and what had happened before she understood me, and said she'd send someone over. A few days later, I was talking with my mother about the incident, and she told me something that hit me hard. I come from a pretty much trilingual household, and she told me that when I called her that night, he couldn't make out what language I was speaking because I had been so panicked. Makes sense why I had to repeat myself over and over to the operator. I started running around the house like a lunatic, checking every door and every lock in a frenzy, until I got to the kitchen and saw that the window had been broken. Without thinking, I slammed it shut. Stupid, I know, but I was beside myself. I wasn't thinking straight. My brother came home a few minutes later, and when he came in, he saw me panicked, crying my eyes out and speaking almost unintelligibly. He came to the bedrooms, and he saw the damage and told me to go sit in the living room and calm down. I did as he said and tried to calm down, but I jumped at every sound and started crying worse. telling him I was sorry that I got home too late and that our laptops were gone. The house seemed so big to me at those moments, so dark and so hostile, and I felt so small and helpless. My brother called me over to my room and showed me a pillowcase full of something, and when we looked inside, we found both laptops, all my jewelry, fake, all of it, my old phone and some other stuff. They had been right in front of me the whole time, but I was so messed up that they didn't even register. The police eventually came about an hour later and did fuck all, so my brother and I took it to the police station and filed a report of the incident. And since I had seen half of one of the culprits' faces, they asked me to come in for an identification. They even sent over someone to dust for prints. Nothing ever came of it. The police said that since they didn't even have a backpack to put the loot in, and resorted to using one of our pillowcases, they were almost 100% junkies. We had the outdoor metallic ladder ripped off our kitchen balcony, much to my cat's displeasure, since that's how they got in. We also installed several motion detecting lights. For the next few months, I was constantly on edge, and every time I passed near some suspicious characters who hung around near my usual bus stop, I felt a violent rage boil in me. I caught myself looking for the man I had seen, ready to beat him within an inch of his life. But I never saw him or heard his creepy whisper again, and my brother and I moved away from that apartment a few months later because I never felt comfortable in that apartment again. I picked up kickboxing, and because it has made me stronger, it has helped me feel safer, and I also always carry a knife with me now. I still think back on that encounter and realize how fucking stupid I was. What creeps me out the most is knowing that that night, there had been nothing but a thin plywood door separating me from two potentially dangerous men. Even if I know that me busting in my brother's room like a lunatic is what scared them off because of how stupidly fearless I was, I also realize how bad it could have gone. They could have had guns. They could have had knives. They could have had pepper spray or a chain or whatever. And there were two of them and only one of me. And if they ganged up on me, even with the adrenaline having turned me into Doom Guy, I don't know how much of a chance I realistically stood against two men, high on whatever they were on, and desperate enough to break into an apartment and stuff loot in a pillowcase. Had they been willing to put up a fight, this would have ended very, very badly for me. What I do know is that I probably still would have busted in there like Doom Guy. So, to the creepy, cowardly bastards who dared break into my apartment and tried to rob me and my brother and ended up traumatizing me so bad I had to move, fuck you both. I hope for your fucking sake we never meet again, because I've been kicking that sandbag for 2 years now and picturing your face every single time. I'm a late 20s female, and this happened fairly recently. Nothing bad happened to me, but I'm lucky it didn't, and it easily could have. There is a conservation area that I used to like to walk in regularly. It's beside a golf course, near an ordinary subdivision, just off a busy road, and is popular with dog walkers and photographers. The conservation area is fairly well maintained, and alerts its users that there are hidden cameras everywhere. My point in bringing attention to all of this is to say that by all accounts, this is a very safe, vanilla, urban wooded area in a populated area. One big thing about me is that I like isolation to recharge. I dislike crowded trails and, by convention, go in off-peak hours or when the weather is unpleasant. Not dangerous, but unpleasant. Too cold, lightly raining, foggy, etc. I stay safe, but I like there to be as few people around as possible. In a city, in daylight, I don't feel like I'm taking any risks by doing this. First encounter. There was one day I went at around 4 p.m. or so, on a frigid rainy Monday in November. On days like that, there are maybe only 1 or 2 dog walkers, but today, there was no car in the parking lot except for a dirty blue pickup truck with a man sitting in it. I noticed that he was looking at me, but that didn't really bother me. I was just happy to see the trail was empty. On this particular day, I went to the area to practice my navigation skills. I was learning how to use a compass at that time, and it's good to practice that skill in an area that you won't get lost in. So I decided to go off-trail to a big pine plantation, which is a big open area with large mature pine trees, if you are not familiar. It's not a hiking area or really that interesting in any way, and definitely off-trail. You wouldn't get there unless you really wanted to get there. So I pick my first landmark and sight it using my compass, and I'm pacing towards it. I find myself about halfway there when I hear rustling through bushes, and I turn around to see the man from the dirty blue pickup truck there entering the pine plantation. Mid-50s white man, a little pudgy, wearing a baggy beige cardigan and blue slacks. I feel pretty alert at this point. Feels out of place somehow. I take note, but pretend to keep walking around with my compass because I don't want to seem weird. I look at him. He pretends to ignore me. I'm getting a really bad gut feeling about the situation for some reason at this point, and I feel like he's following me. But I have an anxiety disorder, so I try to not freak out for zero reason, and I don't want to ruin my relaxation time. It's just a guy walking around. No big deal. To see if he's following me, I pivot 180 degrees and walk directly towards the trail again. He's still following me. I walk through the bushes, onto the trail, still following me. At this point, I was freaked out. The pine plantation entrance is only about 50 feet on the trail, so this guy would have walked 50 feet, entered the pine plantation, then decided that was it for the day. Bad odds. Definitely following me. I quickly exit the trail, and when I'm leaving the parking lot, I see that he's still looking at me. I take the long way home. The experience freaks me out, and I only visit the area once before the second encounter. Second encounter. This time was in January. This time I want to go bird watching. A week prior, I had seen an owl in the same pine plantation. I was practicing navigation again, and I wanted to see it again. I had seen it about an hour before sundown, so I figured that was a good time to try to see it again in the same area. I checked the parking lot, and there was no blue pickup truck, but there were two other cars with men. One was a red sedan with heavily tinted windows, and it looked like the other one was empty. So I go on the trail again. Today is muddy, wet, and cold. Area should be totally empty. Good. Unfortunately, not so. About 20 feet on the trail, I hear footsteps behind me. I don't like when people walk behind me, but it's not a crime, and I'll lose them soon when I go to the pine plantation. I'm sure you know where this is going. When I walk on the pine plantation, there is the same rustling of the bushes before, and when I turn around, I see the same man from before. I feel a wave of terror and dread overcome me, alone in a muddy forest with a possible stalker. But it's still so calm, and it feels so mundane. To confirm my fears, I walk over to the area where I saw the owl last week, and pause to look for it. Who do I see next to me but the same freaking guy from before? I am terrified at this point, and every part of me is screaming, "Run!" So I walk as fast as I can to the trail again. I pass some other random guy in the same pine plantation and smile at him, just totally on autopilot. He smiles back. It wasn't until I was in the parking lot where I got freaked out that there was a second person in the same pine plantation. Could they have been connected somehow? I stop briefly in the parking lot and take out a small notepad to quickly write down the license plates of the two cars. This gives the original man a chance to catch up to the parking lot. I'm booking it out, on foot, out of the parking lot, and he yells towards me, "Can I give you a ride?" And I just shake my head and keep walking. As I walk away, he begins to follow me in his car. He waits at the intersection to see which direction I'm going in, and I decide to walk in a busy park to lose him. He pulls into a nearby hidden driveway and stares at me and takes out his phone to presumably take a photo of me. He notes what direction I'm walking in, then does a U-turn and drives fast the other way. I took the long way home, filled out a police report, and the police opened an investigation on it. I have not gone back to the conservation area since, and the experience has definitely left me with an ongoing nervousness about being alone. Doubly more because I do not know who the second guy is. I passed him so quickly, I only know that he was in his mid-50s and had glasses and was bald. The police, unfortunately, told me there's nothing they can really do at this point. So the best I can do is stay vigilant and try to not let it freak me out too much. Unfortunately, this has totally ruined my love for going out into the wilderness alone. Nothing bad happened, but I think that was more because I was able to escape and lose him, them, before anything did. I was about 13 when my family went on our annual trip to Poland to visit family. My mother and father both come from a small rural village about 2 to 3 hours away from Warsaw. It's an idyllic little place that is surrounded by lush forest and wheat fields. Life is different there. Everyone is very carefree and relaxed. Being the small place it is, everyone knows one another since everyone essentially lives on the same street. I had made a bit of a reputation for myself there, being known as the American girl who visits in the summers, so whenever we would arrive, the whole village would know. I loved the attention. All the kids wanted to play, and adults doted on me. One of the townspeople I saw most frequently was Tomek. Tomek was a funny guy in his upper 20s who would work in the village deli store. He would always give me extra meat anytime my grandparents would send me out to pick food up or offer to show me inside the kitchen. I never took him up on that offer. The idea of seeing how my meat was made was too much for my 13-year-old mind. Though I didn't know it at the time, Tomek had the reputation of being the town lunatic. He wasn't a stranger to the police force or the villagers, as he was a bit of a petty thief. My grandparents told me when I got older that my grandfather had not once but twice caught him trying the doors of his shed, and then excusing himself when caught as drunk and unsure where he was. Despite this, I had never had a reason to fear or avoid him. The village had a tradition called Gra Odwagi, which translates to the game of courage, that would fall in between the dates of our visits. On this day, the village children would be set into teams and then given items to find that were hidden around the woods or village parameters. The event lasted all day, and the group that had the most found items would win a prize. The courage part of the game would be trying to attain the golden item, which would be in the woods and guarded by a few adults armed with water guns. The only way to get the golden item was to avoid being sprayed with water. If all members of a team were hit, then the team would lose the chance to attain it. My team consisted of my 4 friends, Eva, Arek, Bartek, and Pavel. Our strategy was to get as many of the items around town, and then try our luck at the golden object when it got darker, in order to be harder to spot. We got a lot of the items throughout the day, and worked up a good sweat after racing against the other children. Around 7 p.m., we had attained 12 items, and were ready to try our luck at the golden item. We had heard from the other children that the adults were being relentless, guarding the object with ferocity. The wooded area that was the destination as the golden item area was behind Erek's house. Therefore, he took the lead in devising the plan. Our plan was that we were going to split up into 2 teams. Arek, Eva, and Bartek were meant to grab the adults' attention and drive them away as far as possible, while Powell and I would sneak in and grab the item. Feeling confident, we headed into the forest as the sun was slipping from the sky. We followed the dirt path for about 5 minutes, and then stepped off it, following Eric as he navigated through the shrubbery with ease. He stopped us just as we reached a thick clump of bushes. Putting a finger to his lips, he motioned for us to look through the gaps in the shrubbery and see the adults. It was dark now, so it was hard to see who was actually guarding the items, but we could make out 4 shapes huddled together, chatting softly. Without hesitation, we moved into our plan of action. Our 3 friends navigated around and disappeared from our sight, only for us to hear their laughs and the voices of adults yelling to get them. Pavel and I watched as the adults raced after our friends, all abandoning the area they had stood around. I remember glancing around and getting ready to jump out of the bushes when I felt Pavel's arm on my shoulder and saw him make a shushing sound. "They might not all be gone. Wait a bit," he urged. We sat quietly, listening intently for any sounds. Then it happened, the slightest sound of something moving on the other side of the clearing. We couldn't make out who or what it was, so we stayed quiet, peering through the gaps of the shrubbery. Pavel saw it first. He pointed out what looked like a dark figure crouching behind a tree closest to the clearing. We watched as the figure moved tree to tree, never stepping out from behind, just simply observing. Just as I was about to suggest that one of us should cause a distraction, we heard a yelp and turned to see another team approaching, clearly happy that there seemed to be no one around where the golden item should be. We watched as this small group of 2 raced around the clearing but didn't pick anything up. I kept waiting for the adult to step out and spray the kids, but the figure remained crouched, half visible behind the trees. One of the girls approached the area the adult was in, but she was busy looking up at the tree, musing to her partner that maybe the object was put on a branch. We watched as she began pulling herself up the lowest branch, and I remember the way my stomach dropped when all of a sudden we saw the adult shoot out behind the tree, grab her leg, and start pulling her into the darkness of the forest. Her partner ran off screaming, leaving me and Powell unsure what to do. We watched frozen with horror as the adult began covering the girl's mouth in some attempt to silence her. Before either one of us could do anything, all of a sudden, Tomek came running up the path and threw himself onto the man. Powell shot out to help Tomek, while I ran back to call for help. When I reached the backyard that was the destination spot for the end of the game, I was screaming uncontrollably in a mix of words that took me a few attempts to get out that help was needed. A large group of the men raced toward the forest, while I hid in my mother's arms awaiting to see everyone arrive back safely. My friends, Arek, Eva, and Bartek, approached me cautiously and asked what had happened and why Pavel and I hadn't come back. It had turned out that after Eva, Bartek, and Arek had distracted the adults and drove them away, the adults had decided to end the time to get the gold item. They had assumed that everyone had a chance to try to get it and didn't want the kids wandering the forest after dark. One of the adults had already pocketed the item when they chased our group back towards the main backyard. My team had assumed that we would see that there was nothing there and return as well, which is why they didn't come looking for us. As I retold what happened, everyone in the backyard listened to me with wide eyes. About 10 minutes passed, and we saw the group of men coming back, Pavel walking beside his father, and the girl who had been attacked in the arms of her assumed father. As they all approached, I asked Pavel what had happened. As the parents gathered and talked in hushed voices, Pavel described to us how Tomek had beaten the guy bloody but let him escape when he turned away, surprised by the men that had arrived to help. He mentioned that a few men were still out scouting the forest land for the guy. I then asked the remainder of my friends why help was not sent earlier by the girl's partner that had run away screaming. Everyone had looked at me with blank faces, and the sudden realization hit me hard. The next events become a blur. It's a mix of me racing to my parents with my friends and asking about the girl, a frenzy of people calling out her name and begging her to come out, a whirlwind of everyone rushing to get their kids inside, and a mayhem of adults swarming together to go search the woods again and call the police. It's been 8 years now and she hasn't been found. Tomek was one of the main suspects, believed to be part of a 2-man kidnapping operation, but backed out when he saw that too much attention was brought to the event. I'm not sure whatever happened to him, but I can't help but feel guilty that I didn't do anything to help either of those girls. I saw the girl run away. Pavel and I were the last to see her. Sometimes when I see a child with braided hair, I get thrown back to that night, and I can still see her braids swirling around her as her figure disappeared from sight. Hello, my English is shit, but I have a story for you guys. This took place around 2 years ago. I was driving to work, a 5-hour drive. It was already dark. About 3 hours into the drive, I started to get tired. I bought myself a coffee and some snacks at a gas station and went on. But snacks and coffee can only keep you awake for so long, and I started to feel tired again. This part of the road was nothing but thick, dark pinewood forest around me. No other cars on the road. Nothing, only insects smashing my windshield now and then, and an empty road. I was now extremely tired, and at one point I nearly drove off the road from almost falling asleep. I have to sleep now. I can't wait for a gas station. I need to stop as soon as I see a place where I can park my car. Anything. When I'm tired, I fall asleep really fast. If I'm tired enough, I can fall asleep in the middle of a sentence when I'm talking, so it's a bit urgent for me to find a place where I can stop. It felt like an hour, but probably just 5 minutes went by, and I spot this little pocket in the road. It's like a parking space for quick stops, like peeing, switching drivers, or stuff like that. Not even a real resting area. I stopped here and turned down my windows to check if I heard any weird noises. It was total silence, so I turned up the windows again. Nothing bad is going to happen. I haven't seen a car for like 30 minutes, and this road is empty. If someone is checking out my car, I bet it is the cops checking on me if I am alright. I leave my keys in the ignition and I lock the doors just to be safe. I adjust my seat a bit to make it more comfortable to sleep in, and I take off my shoes and put them on the passenger seat on the right. It is so nice to close my eyes and I instantly fall asleep. I don't know why, but something wakes me up. I can't really see anything. Some kind of bright light hits me in the eyes. First I thought it was a flashlight, but then I realized it was the high beams from another car in my rearview mirror that were blinding me. I look in my left mirror and I see a dude walking up beside my car. Maybe he wants help with something? Should I make it clear to him that I'm in here? He is right beside my left back door. Should I step out and ask what he is doing? I didn't have to. The dude proceeds to jerk and pull on my left back door. I almost shit my fucking pants when I realize that he is trying to force his way into my car. My seat is adjusted for me to lay down and I pushed it back max, but I can't reach the pedals, which makes it impossible for me to drive my car. I slam the car horn and it breaks the silence with a roar and the dude jumps. That gives me like 2 seconds to push my seat to reach the pedals, but it's still way out of adjustment, so I'm kind of pulling myself to the steering wheel because my seat is laying flat and isn't supporting my back. Anyway, I start my car and drive off with a cloud of smoke from my screeching tires. It's hard driving a car with nothing holding up your upper body, but I managed. As I leave, I look in the rearview mirror, and I can see how the dude stands there and looks at me, and I can see two more guys coming up beside him. What I can see in the silhouette of their beams, one of them has something in his hand, like a wrench or crowbar. I drove super fast, way over the speed limit. My whole body was trembling with adrenaline and fear. I drove like that for like 30 minutes, then I stopped at a gas station to fix my seat and put my shoes on again. I figured out I was only sleeping for like 10 minutes. Well, I didn't have to sleep until I got to my destination, which is surrounded by heavy-duty fencing, and the building has an alarm. I told my boss the next day, and he said they actually have problems with what we call it in Sweden, road pirates. Criminals that force you to stop on the road and rob you of everything, including your car. In that specific area, it could just be three nice dudes that wanted to check if I was okay. Then why didn't they just knock on my driver's window? The thing in his hand could be a big flashlight. Be safe. When I was 11, my family of 6 decided to make the move from suburbia to a lovely rural bungalow. I have 3 sisters aged 9, 12, and 18 at the time. We were all excited for the privacy and isolation of our new home. For once in our lives, we would have no neighbors and a large yard to play in. Our home had large picture windows, giving us a beautiful view of the farmland around us. My parents disliked curtains because there were no neighbors and they collect dust, so we all figured, what's the point? The summer there was so much fun. Every morning I would get up and take my dog for a walk around the woods in our backyard. I absolutely adored the feeling of being alone and was enjoying the freedom of all our new space. Fall eventually rolled around and I continued my routine of walking my dog, both in the morning and after school. I remember one morning while walking my dog, I began feeling uncomfortable. I was alone in the woods. There was no one around, but I still felt as though I was being watched. I had shivers down my back the entire walk, and for an 11-year-old, I just felt really strange. My dog was acting weird too. I kept trying to go farther into the woods, but she kept trying to pull me towards our shed. The shed rested at the very back of our yard, on the edge of the woods, where the trees thin out quite a bit. I didn't like how I was feeling, so I picked up my dog and brought her back to the house, and went on with my day. Days went by, and I just couldn't seem to shake this feeling of being watched. Especially when I was in my bedroom, which had a huge window in it that overlooked our backyard. The view of the woods that I had previously loved was beginning to scare me. I assumed it was just because it was fall and the forest started looking kind of gloomy. I started having nightmares about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing the figure of a man in our backyard. Weird things kept happening around our house. We all suddenly noticed that we were eating things like bread a lot quicker. Every morning half a loaf of bread would be gone, and my parents attributed this to their hungry growing children. One evening, I woke up and heard noises coming from our family kitchen, which was just down the hall from my bedroom. It sounded like someone had come home, and I assumed it was my oldest sister. The only thing that was strange was her footsteps sounded a lot heavier than they usually do. The noise stopped very quickly, and I was able to fall back asleep. In the morning, my mom asked me and my 2 sisters, 9 and 12 years old, if we woke up last night to make food. We all said no, and then I asked if it was my oldest sister. My mom told me that she stayed at her friend's house last night, and then thought it was probably the dog making noise. I was terrified. I knew I heard unfamiliar footsteps. That night I had a lot of trouble sleeping. I still felt like someone was watching me. Eventually I had fallen asleep, but woke up around 2:30 a.m. I heard noises in the house again. It was the same footsteps I had heard before. I stayed in my bed and felt paralyzed. I rolled over and faced the window, hoping that if someone came in my room, they'd think I was asleep. The noises stopped, and I closed my eyes as hard as I could. I told myself I was just imagining things and that monsters aren't real. About an hour must have gone by, and I eventually opened my eyes. When I looked out the window, I swear to God, I could see a man standing in our backyard watching our house. The photo contains a cheesy edit of where I saw him. I was terrified enough that I didn't move at all, and eventually fell asleep again. I was so relieved to wake up alive that morning, but was still terrified of our backyard. I ran into the kitchen to tell my mom what I saw and refused to walk the dog. I'm not sure if she really believed me at the time or thought I was having night terror hallucinations, which I did have quite often when I was younger. I went to school that morning. I was anxious all day. The last thing I wanted to do was go home. When I did get home, I saw police vehicles surrounding the house. They had the dogs with them and were searching our yard. They told us a man who had broken into another home and beaten the couple living there was suspected of being on our property. He stole their wallets, photos, and other small items of value. The biggest thing he stole was their car, which had been ditched 10 kilometers from our home. While searching our property, they found all the items from his previous break-in hidden around our yard. They also discovered that he had been hiding in our shed since his previous break-in. They said he had done this at the previous home prior to breaking in. He would spend time watching the house and observing the residents' routine until he knew it well enough to start coming inside the house. They said he had a long history of premeditated violence, including child abuse, and believed he was planning on eventually harming us. In the shed, they found wrappers, empty cans of food, and scraps. They told us he was definitely coming into our house for the food during the night. From the shed, he had a perfect view of our home and could see when we all went to bed. Although they searched our house and property with the dogs, they didn't find him. After that day, I realized that if you feel like you're being watched, you probably are. Some backstory. This was years ago. I was around 12 or 13. I grew up in a small town, technically a village, about an hour and a half away from a big city in the US. On summer days, my best friend and I would also venture around our woodsy neighborhood and do typical kid things. I had a little sister who was around 7 or 8 at the time, and she also had a little sister the same age. My friend's name was Sarah, my little sister Sammy, and her little sister Alex. We would occasionally let them tag along on our adventures, especially if our parents made us. Our favorite thing to do was walk to our other neighbor's house, we'll call them the Smiths, and use their trampoline. It was in our neighborhood, but the houses are pretty spread out with dense forest in between. We'd set off towards their place, and it was about a 20 to 30 minute walk, longer on the way back because we had to then go uphill. One day Sarah and I decided to let Sammy and Alex come to the trampoline with us. They weren't really allowed very far from our houses without an adult, or us with them. We played on it for an hour or two and decided we were thirsty or hungry, one of the two, and decided to head back to Sarah and Alex's house for snacks. We were almost back to their house, but the last stretch before their house was the longest amount of isolated road, with a creek flowing by and no houses lining the road, just dense forest. As soon as we cleared this area, we would be right on top of their house. As we're almost through the wooded part and we can see their house up ahead, a woman with short black hair and sunglasses is walking her baby in its stroller. She was walking towards us and would pass us soon. I didn't recognize her as someone who lived in our neighborhood, and I know everyone, but lots of people from surrounding neighborhoods take walks here because of the woods. She passes by us normally, but right after she does, she says, "Oh, hey kids, I'm a little lost. What road is this?" None of us were very alarmed. The neighborhood can be confusing, and plus she was a lady with a baby, not some scary, creepy man. We told her the name of the road, and she told us she was really lost and needed to get home to take care of her baby. She then asked if we could escort her to her house because she didn't think she'd be able to find it even with directions. Sarah agreed to help, but I felt really uncomfortable and was told never to talk to strangers, even if they're women. I told the lady none of us could help because Sarah's dad was expecting us home soon. Sarah gave me a weird look, but I think she caught on because she said, "Oh yeah, we can't actually help, sorry." At this point, I wasn't really freaked. I just knew I shouldn't be helping strangers to their house. I went to step in front of the younger two. They were trailing behind us, and I wanted to push them forward so we could start walking away. I stepped closer to the lady in my efforts, and could then look into her stroller. That is when my heart sank. The baby was fake. It was a baby doll. It was all wrapped in blankets, but I could see that it was plastic. At that point, I didn't know what to do, and I found myself screaming, "Run!" I made sure Sammy and Alex were ahead of me, and we sprinted for their house. Her dad was working in the garage on something, and we ran in out of breath and crying. I quickly just said there was a lady trying to get us to go home with her, who had a fake baby. He grabbed a golf club from his caddy that was lying out and told us to get in the house. We all went in, and a few minutes later he came back. He said he was heading towards the lady when she spotted him. She was already on the phone with someone. Out of nowhere, a white van apparently screeched up, and she threw the stroller in, and they sped off. It was definitely a creepy experience. I don't know what that lady's intentions were, but I feel like they weren't innocent. This truly scared the shit out of us, We didn't wander around the neighborhood nearly as much, and when we did, we were always looking out for something. That night, I was hanging out with 3 friends, Sarah, Nick, and Mary. We were celebrating Nick's birthday at his place, which happened to have a hot tub in the backyard. After a couple of hours and a couple too many beers, we jokingly suggested skinny dipping in the hot tub as some kind of birthday present. It would have probably stopped there if it hadn't been for our drunkenness, so we did eventually say, "Fuck it, let's do it." Now for context, Nick's house was by a forest and was very isolated from neighbors. Adding to that, it was maybe past midnight, and anything past the Christmas lights of dubious quality that were spread around the yard was basically pitch black. Being fucking pussies, going out there without Nick's parents' home would have been unimaginable if it hadn't been for the wonders of inebriation. So, semi-reluctantly, I followed my friends into the night with a towel on my shoulder. We reached the hot tub that was worryingly close to the edge of the woods, and we started stripping. Everything was fine for the next 30 minutes or so, apart from the occasional branch cracking. We were having fun, telling stories or rambling about stupid shit, and the fear quickly faded away. That was until a deafening shriek came from the darkness of the forest, lasting for about 5 seconds. It sounded like a human voice, but it almost didn't sound like a person. We all turned livid, became silent for what seemed like hours, and I even saw Nick lose his boner in a matter of seconds. We didn't dare try to look into the forest, except Mary, who just grew a pair of balls out of nowhere and picked up her phone to use the flashlight. We couldn't help but follow the light as she pointed it at the forest, which seemed unaffected by it, as if the darkness was swallowing it. Nothing. As we were about to stop looking, though, the void stared back at us. Mary shined her light far behind Sarah, and it reflected on a pair of eyes and a white form in the distance. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We rushed out of the tub without even giving a single thought about gathering our clothes. Mary and I screamed. Apparently her balls had been blown to smithereens, and we all ran towards the back entrance as fast as possible. Nick immediately got a knife while we locked every door and window. We wanted to call Nick's parents, or the police, or anyone, but our phones were over by the forest where we'd left them. Seeing no other choice, Nick put shoes on and made a run for it. He'd managed to get his phone, but he'd heard loud breathing coming from the forest, meaning whatever it was hadn't left. What followed were the shittiest 2 hours of my life. Nick got his parents to make their way home, handed us towels so we could finally cover ourselves, and we gathered in the basement where there were no windows. We spent most of the time in silence, waiting for something to happen. Half an hour in, we heard another shriek, more distant. Only this time, it was shortly followed by knocks on the door that couldn't possibly be Nick's parents. Sarah actually started crying, but thankfully it stopped after that. The parents arrived and allowed us to sleep in the basement for safety. They hadn't heard or seen anything, and were pretty sure we just imagined stuff. We hardly slept, and once the morning came, we went out to get our stuff. The phones, keys, and wallets were all there. The only things missing were Nick's shirt and Sarah and Mary's panties. I wasn't wearing any that night. So that left us with 2 possible scenarios. A weird pale-ass pervert spied on us in an isolated area deep in the woods, or whatever other creepy shit roams in there, just decided to spook us. For clarity, I am a straight 21-year-old female. So in November of 2016, I went through a pretty bad breakup. In October 2017, I finally felt comfortable enough to try to get back into the dating world. So, like a moron, I got on Tinder, and it wasn't my first rodeo with Tinder, but this was the strangest thing that happened to me. So towards the end of October, I met a guy named Dave on Tinder. And from the looks of it, he was an okay guy. He was funny and a gentleman. Didn't ask for anything inappropriate, it seemed fine. We talked for about 2 weeks and set up a time to go on a date. We decided to meet in the city where he had recently moved to, which was about 35 minutes away from my house. I got to the bar to wait for him and he was 15 minutes late. He walked in and looked relatively similar to his pictures, which I was happy about. And then he opened his mouth to talk, and he had a very strange voice, like he was always on the verge of crying. Very weird. He had some tattoos on his arm, including the all-seeing eye Illuminati symbol. Trying to break the tension, I jokingly said, "Illuminati confirmed. Tell me all your secrets." And he goes, "What the hell are you talking about? Don't say that kind of stuff in public." I just kind of laughed it off, and he was being really weird. He then says, "You know that people who pry are people who die." I just looked at him, and I genuinely did not know how to respond. Fast forward about 20 minutes, and a couple of my friends came to the bar at my urging. I moved to sit on the same side as him so that my friends could sit on the same side of the booth. The minute I sit down, he puts his hand on my knee and squeezes. And not like, "Oh, I'm interested," but a hard fucking squeeze. I looked at him to stop, and he leans over and whispers, "You have lovely kneecaps." Like, boy, what? By the time my friends left, which was about an hour into the date, he had 7 beers. It was a Tuesday. As I go to close my tab, he stands behind me and he had a boner. Full-mast boner. I very quickly signed my receipt and stepped away. As I'm getting ready to say goodbye, it starts raining, and he then informs me that he walked to the bar from his house and asks for a ride home. Reluctantly, I agreed. And on the very short drive to his house, he informs me that it's not actually his house and that he is living in his sister's basement. When I finally park in front of his house, he leans over to kiss me, and I try to give him the cheek, and he physically turns my head and puts his entire tongue in my mouth. And I pulled away, and this guy did it again. I finally pulled away and said, "Get the fuck out of my car." And he responds with, "I am in love with you. I knew from the moment I saw your pictures. You have to come inside and meet my sister and her husband." I told him that if he didn't get out of my car, I was calling the police. And he started tearing up and got out of my car. Two weeks ago, my mom started getting deliveries from a local flower shop with cryptic messages and has no idea who they're coming from. And then today, something else happened. The first that came a couple of weeks ago was a bouquet with a note. "Do these smell better?" She asked her boyfriend, and he said he didn't order anything and was equally as weirded out as her that she was receiving flowers from a total stranger. Not to mention the weird note with no context. She had no idea who it would be from or what the note meant. Do these flowers smell better than what? There was no context, and it sounded like some kind of inside joke that she was supposed to understand, but she had no idea what they were referring to. He mentioned it to my dad and her close friends too. It wasn't them either. She called the flower shop and they said they weren't allowed to disclose who it came from and wouldn't give her any information. So it wasn't like it was just a promo thing from the shop to get business. Yesterday she texted me while I was at work and said she just received another bouquet with chocolates and another note. White, blue, red, and green buttons falling from a tree. Typos included, not that that matters. At least the first note made half sense. This one is weird as fuck. Then today something else happened. Without being specific, obviously my mom has the same last name as a historical figure. She just got a random Amazon package, opened it, and it was a book about that same historical figure called Have You Heard of... It was a kid's book. My younger brother and I are both adults, so there's no reason for anyone to send this as a gift, and we have different last names anyway. I'm a female in my 20s who recently moved back in with my mom and my brother for financial reasons to get back on my feet and pay for my divorce after the lease for my place was up. My brother works the night shift, so it's only me and my mom in the house at night, which is when I'm the most worried about something happening. I can't think of any reason why someone would be doing this without saying anything unless they're a fucking creep. And we can't think of anyone who would do this as a prank. The first one was strange, but we just kind of brushed it off, thinking it wouldn't happen again. The second one yesterday makes it even creepier, and the random book today made both of us even more uneasy. It's one thing to send flowers, but whoever it was went out of their way to get a random Amazon book with her last name on it. I'm really weirded out now knowing there's nothing we can really do but wait and see if something happens again or if things get creepier. I feel helpless, and the thought of us being home alone at night freaks me out. I know nothing has actually happened, but I don't feel safe. If the person doing this has ill intentions, they know where we live. Her boyfriend stays at the house on the weekends, stays with his kids during the week, so I feel a lot safer when he's here. But during the week, it's just us. Other than that, I have no idea who it is or why they're doing this. Edit. Holy shit, I was not expecting so many responses. Thank you guys for your tips so far. I thought I was going to be told that I'm overreacting and being silly, and I hope that's the case once we get to the bottom of this. I left home for the day before checking Reddit and wasn't able to get pics of the flowers yet, but for now, here are the notes that came with the flowers. I blocked out phone numbers, but apparently Pro Flowers is a big company for online deliveries across the East Coast, and they don't have stores. I've never used them before, so I didn't realize. My mom texted me these pics when she got the flowers, and I believe she's since thrown the notes away, or else I'd write my Reddit user somewhere in it as additional proof. Update 1. I texted my mom from work, and she said she has contacted Pro Flowers a second time after receiving the second bouquet on Tuesday, and they outright refused to give her any info again. She said they told her in their exact words, "It's the law." The fuck? That irritates the fuck out of me. Someone just told you they feel they are in danger. I work in a call center handling employees' retirement savings accounts. That's the law in serious private financial shit. Some fucking flowers. When someone feels they're in danger. I understand each company has their own policy, but what a dumb policy. That's bullshit, and she cannot be the first person to experience this. Update 2. Major news. I urged my mom to call Amazon today and tell them what's going on since Pro Flowers was no help. The rep said he isn't sure if they can disclose who it came from or not, but he didn't say no altogether. He said he's going to reach out to a supervisor and see if there's anything they can do, and asked her to email a pic of the label, and they will check if they can give her the name or if it's restricted. I'll keep y'all updated on what Amazon says. I still have my guard up, and we are still protecting ourselves though. It's still alarming, but I'm relieved we're taking steps to look into it. No gun right now, so I've got a knife and a huge baseball bat next to my bed now just in case. And my mom's BF is coming over tomorrow for the weekend, so I can feel like I can breathe a little for the next few days, with it not being just two women alone in the house at night. Thank you so much for all of your advice so far. I really appreciate it. Update 3. I called our local police, and they've sent a patrol request to have someone frequent our neighborhood more, especially at night. I found out our neighbor has a camera outside his house, and we're going to get one as well. No other updates. Waiting to hear back from Amazon. I probably won't reply to as many comments right now. My mental health is really suffering from this, and my PTSD is fucking me up, in addition to other stressors going on in my life. I'm taking the necessary steps to protect us, but I just can't talk about it. It's too much. But I'm doing what needs to be done to protect us anyway. Right now, I could just use positive vibes and for y'all to keep us in your thoughts, please. In 2011, I was apartment hunting and found this one place that seemed perfect. There was a main house. Behind it was a guest house that had been recently renovated into a duplex. The ground floor of the guest house had been converted into a large covered garage that could fit 3 cars, plus a ton of storage items. It was really musty, had a terrifying spider population, and lacked working lights. A flight of wobbly wooden steps led up to a second floor deck where 2 side-by-side entrance doors for the separate apartments were. When I first moved in, the guest house had just finished renovations, and the rental agency hadn't found anyone for the other apartment yet. I enjoyed the peace and quiet, which was perfect for studying. A few months after school started in the fall, a new girl moved in. She introduced herself as Angela and said she went to the same school as me, and she was studying biology and was a freshman. She seemed nice and was pretty quiet at first. However, of course, a cue nightmare. After the first month, I started hearing an annoying clopping noise emanating from her apartment. It sounded like she had cloven hooves. She had wood floors, and the sound echoed like crazy. It would suddenly start at 3 a.m., and it would wake my dogs, and they would start howling. Soon, I started hearing the most comical sex noises ever. It sounded like the cheesiest, loudest porn in existence with never-ending fake orgasms. This went on every day, multiple times a day. At first I thought, good for her. After the 3rd day, though, I was tired of it. Bye-bye perfect study environment. One day, when I was getting ready to step outside to grab the mail, I heard voices out on the deck talking. One male, one Angela. I peeked out through my peephole and saw an older guy, maybe 60 to 65 years old, with a fat belly, white hair, and a sweat-stained undershirt. This was maybe 10 minutes following one of the comical sex routines. I assumed she had a super old sugar daddy and waited until they left to grab my mail. A week later, I pulled into the back alley that led to the garage entrance and saw a car parked in front of the garage, blocking the entrance. I assumed Angela had a friend over who decided to park there. I knocked on her door, and she answered in feathered lingerie and clear platform stripper shoes. A very sweaty and out-of-breath older guy said he would move the car. By this point, I had realized that Angela was a prostitute. I excitedly texted my friends the news, and we laughed about it. The next night, it was really dark out. I had gone to the grocery store and pulled into the back alley. The floodlight was out, and it was unnervingly dark. I always hate pulling into the garage because it's insanely creepy, especially when it's this dark out. However, I opened up the door, slid my car in, and then got out to unload. A dark shadow stood at the garage entrance next to my trunk. Hello. I almost peed my pants. Though I liked my guest house, it wasn't in the best neighborhood, and I was convinced I was going to be mugged finally. Instead, the man made small talk, asking me if I lived next door to Angela, if I was a student, how I liked the area, if I had a boyfriend, etc. He told me I was very beautiful and that he'd always wanted an Asian girlfriend. I walked closer to him and saw it was the man from the other week with the white hair and sweat-stained shirt. I was really evasive and asked him if he needed any help. When he said he just wanted to get to know me, I said no thanks. He told me he would pay me. I realized he probably thought I was a prostitute too, and I quickly told him to fuck off. I rushed past him and went upstairs, leaving my groceries in the car and the garage door wide open. Shortly after, I started noticing that things were missing, or moved in my apartment. Clothes would go missing. I'd hunt desperately for a pair of leggings or a dress or a bra, and I would never be able to find them, even after searching the laundry hamper. Stuff like mail or books would be moved from one room to another. My dogs and cat also started acting really skittish. Sometimes I'd catch them staring intently up at a corner. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to hear really serious scratching noises coming from the living room. It sounded like a large animal with big claws was digging away at something. I mumbled, "Muffin, stop." I felt a paw on my arm and slowly opened my eyes. Muffin was on the bed with me, looking at me nervously. Okay, huh? I sat up and looked around. My other dog and my cat were both sleeping soundly on my bed too. So what was in the living room making scratching noises? I also noticed that my bedroom door, which I had shut when I had gone to sleep, was now wide open. Nope. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural, but I was pretty convinced based on the signs that there was a ghost living in my apartment. Maybe this guest house used to be slave quarters. I put in headphones to drown out the noise and stayed up all night doing paranormal research on my laptop. I never once got out of bed to check out the living room. I was way too terrified. The next day, I crated my dogs and cats and went to school. When I got home, I noticed a wall next to the front door had some really deep scratches. The drywall and paint were ruined. These hadn't been there the previous day, and my pets were crated while I was gone, so I couldn't figure out where these had come from. Must be the ghost, I thought. The landlord had told me previously that there were paint cans in the garage, so I figured I would try to hide the ghost's mess with some paint. I went down into the garage. Right in front of my parking spot inside the garage is this weird little workspace that someone had constructed before I moved in. I never looked inside, but it was maybe 6x4 and had walls made of particle board. I didn't see any cans of paint on the garage floor, so I figured this was a storage room for stuff like that. I opened the makeshift door to the workspace. First, I saw shelves with paint cans. Great. Then I looked down and saw a blanket, pillows, a flashlight, a giant plastic canister of cheese balls, a big screwdriver, and a Velcro wallet. There was also a set of weird pull-down stairs at the top of the workspace, attached to the garage ceiling, like the kind you use with an attic. I picked up the wallet and looked inside. Bam! Photo ID of that creepy sweat-stained shirt guy. I immediately fled the garage and went into my apartment to call the cops and report that a homeless guy had apparently moved into my garage. The cops came to investigate. First, they found that the pull-down stairs led up to a door in the ceiling that resembled a ceiling tile. When you lifted and moved the ceiling tile aside, you were in my unused utility closet in my apartment. The cops asked if I ever noticed anything strange in my apartment, and I told them about the missing and moved stuff. Apparently, the screwdriver found in the workspace had flecks of paint and drywall on it. I don't know why someone would just sit in my living room and scratch at the wall with a screwdriver in the middle of the night, but I am so glad I never left my bedroom to look at the ghost now. The cops never found my missing clothes, though. The cops also never found or caught the guy. I tried to confront Angela about the weirdos she was bringing to our building and how one had been living in the garage and breaking into my apartment, but she mysteriously disappeared. No more comical sex noises or clopping. Mail piled up in her box. Then randomly, a month later, a new guy was living there. Weirded out, I called the landlord, who said the new guy was a new tenant and wouldn't give me information on what happened to Angela. Creepy. First things first. I have to rip the band-aid off and admit that from late 2001 to mid-2003, when I was a teenager, I wrote fanfiction and posted it online. My stories weren't that great, but I made friends because I posted them, so I don't regret doing it. Even after I stopped posting stories, I was still active online and instead posted fan art and dumb stuff about the roleplays I did with my buddies over on DeviantArt. Cringe. Maybe I sound like a lame fangirl, but whatever. I was having fun. Fast forward to 2008, when I got a PM on DA that was, well, I really wasn't expecting online life to take such a strange turn on that particular random day, but the writer, Ari, began her missive by informing me, a complete stranger, that she was seriously mentally ill. She listed a wide variety of disorders, including schizophrenia, which had tormented her all her life. She then said she was scared to write to me like this, but that she had to do it so she could move on. Move on from what, you ask? From her hatred of me, of course. Ari wrote that she had hated me for a long time based on the fan fiction I wrote, because my stories terrified her. Okay. Now let's be clear here. I wrote stories about characters from cartoons and one comic book. One of the characters from that comic was a violent and terrible person, and I wrote about him doing violent things, but that's not what was scaring her. Ari was scared because she was in love with said violent character, John, and believed they were destined for each other and that he talked to her in her head. And then she read my fan fiction, and suddenly John stopped talking to her. And she knew it was because he was talking to me instead. She was absolutely certain that I had stolen her true love from her. She said that after that, she developed a belief that I was the arbiter of her reality more generally. That is a direct quote. I will never forget that phrase. And that I was capable of reaching into her mind, and not only reading but taking away her precious thoughts. This caused her so much anguish and suffering. However, she went on. Deep down, she also knew this was a delusion caused by her mental illness. Ari closed her PM by begging me to respond to her, to confirm that I was just a normal girl so she could get past this trauma I had caused her and be happy again. Now, I have to again rip off a band-aid of inviting judgment here by admitting that sometimes I am a complete dumbass. I am also a soft-hearted person, and the idea that someone could have been harmed by the silly stories I'd posted years earlier made me kinda sad. So I did a soft-hearted but ultimately dumbass thing and responded. Yes, I was a normal teenage girl when I posted that stuff, and now I am a normal early 20s woman with no mind-stealing superpowers, lol. Also, I don't know you and had no idea you existed until you sent me this, so how could I have singled you out to hurt you with my fanfics? Please don't worry about me. And I thought, what a kind person I am, and surely that will be the end of it. Wrong. Ari replied to me, using a different, upbeat and cheerful tone, saying she was so glad I wrote back to her because now she knew she didn't have to fear me, and we could just be friends. She loved my fanfics, honestly, and by the way, what was my real name so she could find me on Facebook? Excuse me? No? A dumbass I may be, but I ain't that stupid. I told her I didn't have a Facebook, a lie, and was busy with school, a truth. So I wouldn't be on DeviantArt a whole lot, a half-truth. But I wished her good luck with her mental health recovery and hoped she would have a good life. A truth. I mean, so far she just seemed troubled and weird, but I wouldn't have wished harm on her. I didn't get a response to that, but a few months later I got a DeviantArt PM from another account. I didn't know that simply asked, "Hey Fox Got Socks, how do you get your characters to talk for you?" Now, I hadn't posted any fanfiction for years, but I was still participating in fandom and talking online about writing, and I honestly thought this question was about writing, specifically dialogue. I mulled over how to respond, and ended up not answering right away. I went back to my PMs a few days later and saw I had another new message. This one saying, with a lot of exclamation points and cry-typing style misspellings, that I had to answer and teach this stranger how to talk to my characters, and that I didn't know how long this user had suffered because of me. Oh my goodness, I wonder who it was, using another account. And guess what? I was still a goddamn dumbass. So I answered the first message, but sort of detachedly, ignoring the desperation of the second message, and just kind of giving tips for how to learn a character's voice and how to write dialogue for them. Once again, I got a very chipper reply, including a confession that, yeah, it was Ari and she just loved talking to me and thought I was so nice and such a good friend to be patient with her and answer her burning questions about how to talk to my, yes, specifically my characters. Because you see, she had realized she was not just in love with John, but with my John from my stupid fanfiction. And now she could talk to him anytime because we were friends. I got the idea that she was not asking to roleplay and instead thought she would be able to communicate directly with this once removed fictional character now. But I feigned ignorance and said something like, our RP group is kind of private and not accepting new members, but I hope I answered your question, and please have a good day. Because see, I did not really want to be friends with someone who seemed to believe I was somehow responsible for her mental illness and health, and had already told me once that she hated me and thought I could control her reality. On the kinder side of things, I honestly didn't think continuing to converse would be good for either of our comforts. On the meaner side, I just really didn't want to interact with this person anymore, and felt I had already done more than enough to help this stranger. Okay, so she stopped responding to me, and I thought this strange interlude in my life was over. Wrong. Now fast forward 7 entire years to early July 2015, at which time I had moved my main online presence to Tumblr. I'd left a note on my DeviantArt account in 2011 when I moved, giving my new Tumblr screen name so my fandom buddies could find me easily. At this point, I had not posted any fanfiction for over a decade. I also was not talking much at all online about John, except to reblog the occasional post someone else made about the comic he was from, as you do on Tumblr. Suddenly, I received an anonymous ask, and that ask said in no uncertain terms that I was the cause of the asker's suffering, because I had callously disregarded others' feelings. It closed with some kind of weird threat. I can't remember exactly what now, because I instinctively deleted the ask, due to being unnerved. I guessed that it could be Ari, based on the typing style, and the fact that there couldn't be two people in the world who think I make them suffer, right? But it had been 7 years, so I wasn't entirely sure. And then I did yet another dumbass thing. I made a post that said something along the lines of, to the anon that just sent me a vaguely threatening ask. Sorry if anything I've posted has upset you. Please let me know if I can tag my post a certain way so you can block whatever content you find distressing. A couple of days later, I got another anon ask, calling me a prattling, ostentatious idiot, direct quote, and saying, it doesn't work that way, and strong emotions cannot just be blocked. The message went on, you stole him away from me, and I have been living in turmoil since, and you don't care. Ah, yes, definitely Ari. There was no question about it. After all, I haven't stolen anyone else's fictional boyfriend, that I know of. I turned off anonymous asks. I also went back to my old untouched DeviantArt account, where I found a comment on my front page from yet a third account there that said, if you still talk to him, tell him that I love him and that I always will. He was the first man I ever loved, and it was your version of him I loved above all. I've been jealous, angry at you, angry at myself, depressed, and psychotic. I tore myself to shreds over him, and my heart aches and cries. The first cut is the deepest. I love you, John. The date on this message was June 28th, 2015, just a few days before the first anon ask on Tumblr. I did a little internet sleuthing, just a simple Google of Ari's known usernames, and found her Fur Affinity account, where she had posted screeds in her journal about hating anyone else who wrote or drew anything about John. I also discovered through this Google search that I was not completely special in triggering Ari's ire, and that she had also gone after another person on Tumblr in much the same way, demanding answers to emotionally charged asks, assuming friendship where there wasn't any, and then stalking the person using multiple accounts and email addresses and accusing them of harming her. This other person had amassed a collection of screenshots of Ari's behavior, and it was really super not good. Anyway, I figured since I'd blocked anon asks, maybe she'd just go away. Wrong. Ari's next wave of stuff began in 2016, when someone started reblogging my personal text posts with cryptic comments like, you have a beautiful soul. The username was nothing like Ari or any of the other account names she'd used before, so I just thought someone was being socially awkward. But after a few months of this, I received a message from this account through Tumblr's chat function that let the cat out of the bag. This person said something like, I'm a British female creature with insert same litany of mental illnesses from Ari's first PM 2008. And I'm so scared of dying alone. I used to read your fan fiction and it always made me feel better. I think you're an amazing woman and would like to get to know you better. Please, I'm begging you. Don't leave me alone in dark. Well, this sure sounded a lot like Ari to me. This was confirmed when I went to the person's Tumblr and saw they had recently posted something passive-aggressive about that other Tumblr user Ari was known to stalk. And if that wasn't enough, they also had a lot of weird innuendo-laden posts about John and a couple of other characters, including Sherlock and a man I didn't recognize and who they claimed to have legally married. It was at that point that I finally decided to stop being a soft-hearted dumbass. I blocked the account that sent me the chat message right away, without responding. Over the next several months, Ari attempted to contact others on Tumblr who it was obvious I talked to a lot. My girlfriend, our best friend, etc. She sent them chat messages like the one paraphrased above, hilarious in the case of my girlfriend, who never wrote any fanfiction, begging for their friendship and also, just casually asking what I was doing, whether they could get me to talk to her, that sort of thing. I know my girlfriend and best friend blocked her too after they asked me who the hell this person was, and I told them the whole story. I also discovered that on Tumblr, you can choose an option to allow chat messages only from people you follow. With that account blocked and no one I don't follow able to send me chat messages, I naively thought again that surely this weird nonsense would end. Wrong. See, the thing about Tumblr, if you're not familiar with the website, is that if you block someone, they just can't interact with your posts or follow you. A block causes someone to auto-unfollow you, and they won't see your posts on their dash feed. They also won't be able to send you asks. However, they can still go to your actual blog, username.tumblr.com, and see everything you post. If they try to interact with any of your posts on your blog, reply, reblog, or like, they won't be able to, which will, of course, tip them off that you blocked them. Beginning in 2018, Ari engaged in a whirlwind of activity. She made a new account and sent me an Ask Her 15 saying things varying from, "Please talk to me," "I'm harmless," "You don't know how hard it is to be me," to "I'm so scared of the darkness," to "Humans are social animals and I am dying without you," to "I guess you like psychos like John, but can't handle a real psycho like me," to "I want to kidnap you far away in a happy ending, my darling." So I blocked that account immediately. So she made a new account and reblogged some post I'd made a while back about John's comic book with a comment like, "My first love, the first cut is the deepest," before sending me multiple asks, all saying, "You stole him from me." So I blocked that account immediately. So she made another one, made some meme generator sparkly pictures of rats and spiders with text like, "I just want to sit next to you and be your friend. I'm not scary," and posted them with at my username so this mention would show up on my Dash's activity feed. So I blocked that account. So she made a new account, posted a quote from my favorite author, well-known info, I post about him frequently, and sent me a couple of asks saying that this author would disagree with how I was treating her by continuing to block and shun her friendship when she was harmless and just thought I was an amazing person. So I blocked that account. Mate, did you forget you called me a prattling, ostentatious idiot and threatened me? Because I sure haven't. This went on for 10 accounts, one of which had the blog title in huge letters at the top, "Hello, my nickname reserved only for close friends." One of which she inundated with photos of herself glaring at the camera. My first look's at her face, and I don't like to judge people on appearance, but this girl has a really creepy glare and also looks like she has not showered in weeks. Tagging me in each one. She only ever used one of these accounts to actually post, reblog, and like things from other people like a seemingly normal user, albeit one who made some questionable comments sometimes. All the rest only existed to bother me. I started trying to report her to Tumblr after the third or fourth time for making multiple accounts solely to evade my blocks. But if you know anything about Tumblr, you can guess they didn't respond with more than an automated, "Okay, we'll look into this. In the meantime, have you tried blocking this user?" Anyway, throughout 2018, I just had to deal with the fact that anytime I saw the little red flag above my Assbox icon, it would probably be something creepy and either threatening or passive-aggressive from Ari that would put me on edge for a few hours and remind me that no matter what I do on Tumblr, she can read everything I post. I haven't gotten anything from her so far in 2019, but I figure as long as she's out there, there's always that chance she'll come back. Maybe not right away, maybe not until another 10 years from now, but let me just say, Ari, you fucking weirdo. I'm genuinely sorry about your mental illnesses and hope you get help for them. But while they may explain some of your behavior, they don't excuse it. I am not and never will be your friend, because you are not harmless. You made me heavily curtail my social interaction on Tumblr by cutting off a couple methods of communication that could have been used to make new friends. You made me worried about ever talking there about a comic I enjoy. You made it so anytime I see I have an ask, my heart rate goes up because it might be more of your disturbing bullshit. You've harassed my loved ones and also other strangers who probably didn't do anything to deserve it, etc. I don't control your reality, but if I did, you can bet I'd use that power to ensure we'd never meet. Hey guys, my coworker got me addicted to no sleep. It's about 50% of all our conversations, and after talking with her a bit, I shared some of my personal stories. I began to write them down as I remembered them and realized I've had an insane amount of strange encounters. One story is different though. I'm currently breaking all my paranormal experiences up into chapters and making a series of my stories. There is one story though. It's not paranormal, but still one of the experiences that has stayed with me. I figured since all my stories, except this one, are fit for no sleep, I would use this Let's Not Meet story as a way to shake the rust off my writing skills or lack thereof. I'm now 27. I turn 28 next month. This story takes place 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. Keep in mind that all my stories, NS or LNM, are true experiences I've gone through. They aren't secondhand stories. During summer break, leading up to senior year, my mom and I had to move. I'll save you the details, but we ended up in government housing. The rent was dirt cheap, but the downside was the neighborhood. I live in Oklahoma, by the way. Our first day in our new apartment, there was a meeting called because the police officer that patrols the complex was shot up. That should give you an idea of how bad things were there. The complex did have a gate around it, even though it was never locked. If I go out the back door, I'd pass through the gate and into a 7-Eleven parking lot. Even the people who worked there were shitty. Despite only having 4 pumps, the parking lot was big, with a payphone on both sides. The phone on the west side of the building right next to the bus stop was broken, even though it looked normal. We will be coming back to that payphone. It was a Friday night, and my brother had invited me over to stay the night. He lived in an awful neighborhood as well, about 5 to 10 miles away. We were both adjusting to living in bad neighborhoods. His was slightly better. His was more drug dealing, while mine was more violence. Life was depressing as we didn't even have a house phone. All I had were my CDs and N64, which was already pretty dated. I felt cut off from the world, but I was going to go hang out with my brother, so I was excited. We had a car, but we were poor and didn't have enough gas, so I hopped on the city bus. This is where it gets weird. I watch for the bus from my back door because fuck standing in front of that creepy payphone. I pay my fare and have a seat in the back. I came in through the door closest to the back of the bus, so I barely noticed there was another person sitting in the middle. He was an older white guy, really creepy looking. Had to be late 40s. My first thought was about how grateful I was for being a male, because if a 16-year-old girl was on that bus with this guy, she might not make it home. Now, I didn't actually think he would go super creeper, but I was wrong. This was the last bus on this route for the night. My house was at the beginning, and my brother's was towards the end. Surely I thought that if I'm on the bus for 40 minutes out of the 50 minutes it takes for the bus to go one way, this guy would get off before me. But he stayed, and stayed. Then I started getting nervous. Where was this guy going? Surely he had a planned destination before I go on. My stop approached. The bus fare was 60 cents. I only had 90 cents after I paid the fare, and I was going to stop and get a cheap canned soda, so I hit the button in front of the store. Now, the creepy guy who had been trying to pretend he wasn't looking back at me every few minutes hears the ding. He quickly pretends to hit the button as if it were his stop. I'm not officially scared. I skipped on the soda, which, oddly enough, probably saved my life. I didn't want to run because I felt that he would pick up on my fear and make a move, but I did walk pretty fast, and was out of the bus before he had the chance to stand. Once out of view, I bolted to my brother's apartment. Door's locked. He's not home. The sun is going down, and I have nowhere to hide. He's always home on Friday. He's always home at this time. But I realized that creepy McWeirdo was nowhere in sight and calmed down. I did know he was out there somewhere. The bus had 5 minutes before it hit the end of the line and turned around. 5 minutes from my brother's to the end and back only gave me 10 minutes to make a choice, and I had already wasted 5 minutes. I decided to try to catch the bus home, seeing how I still had 90 cents. I make it to the stop to see the bus coming back. If I had wasted a minute longer, I'd be stuck there. But from behind an apartment building he emerged, looked at me until the bus door opened, and he got back on. I had 30 seconds to decide if I was going to be alone in this neighborhood after dark, stuck outside, or get on the bus he just got on. My logic was that at least if I got on the bus, there would be a driver with me so I wouldn't be alone. I got on the bus. I decided to sit right next to the driver. I look back, and he's sitting in the spot I was in during the first ride. He knew I was onto him, but he wasn't going to give up. After the quietest 40-minute bus ride, I hit the button in front of the 7-Eleven because I figured people would see if this guy tried anything. Once again, he pretended like it was his stop, hearing the ding, looking at me and pressing the button. I was by the door. This time I fucking ran. Seeing a 16-year-old running for his life out of a bus got some looks. Then people looked back at the bus. I got to the gate when I turned around to see where this asshole was. We locked eyes. He got nervous now that people were looking at him. So he grabbed the payphone, pushed a few buttons and started talking. He was pretending to have a conversation on the broken payphone. That's when I knew this guy had bad intentions, that I wasn't just paranoid. I didn't realize how lucky I was until I walked into the apartment. There was my mom and my brother. My brother forgot I was coming over and had just arrived moments before I did. He had his backpack and clothes and said he came over to stay the night. In other words, if I hadn't gotten back on that bus, I would have been sitting on the porch of my brother's apartment for God knows how long, until someone went looking for me, which they did not have the gas to do. I work at a big retail store as a self-checkout host. Most of my days are spent walking laps and listening to customers saying things like, "I don't work here," or "Why aren't you on the register?" I understood their frustrations. Usually there would be 2 or 3 of us at the self-check and maybe 2 manned registers open. We got a new guy in. We'll call him Terry. Terry always wore a mask as it was 2021 and COVID was still COVIDing. I was training him, telling him to stock candy in bags. He would ask questions anyone would ask. If I'm in school, if I have a girlfriend. I lived in a small city, big town that had a good college. Students from all over the country would come and usually wound up with the prisons or retail. I usually asked the same questions. I told him no on both accounts. He then asked if I ever went hunting. We had a lot of woods and a big forest around the town. No, I don't like guns. He said he'd have to take me one day. A few days go by, and he's over on my side again. He asked if I have family in town, and if they didn't, do they live close? I live 3 doors down from my mom. He starts talking about hunting again, how he was out with his buddies and started using pack tactics, where they would box in the prey and finish off. Weird for deer, seeing as they flee at the first thought of a noise. He's off for a few days because new hires have problems getting hours for the first 3 weeks. I talk to one of my coworkers and they tell me he asks a lot about me. The next time I see him, his questions are very telling. How tall would you say you are? How much do you weigh? How well do you know the woods past so-and-so street? I'm a big guy at 6 feet and 300 pounds, and when he brought up hunting again, a creepy thought would send a chill down my spine. Come on, man, you'd like. Just some good old boys shooting the shit late at night in the middle of the woods. Then the real fun starts right before dawn. They won't know what hit them. The mask hid most of his face, but I could see it rise when he smiled. I don't know why he thought that would be a great way to convince someone. Other than feeling like they were about to hunt me, it sounded like I would have been bored as frick before. I must have made a face or something, because he turned and walked away quickly. I told a couple of coworkers about it, but that was his last day. I never saw him again, and I hope that we never meet again.